Give me some of the toughest pitchers that you face that you like, you know what? If I'm not on my A game today, he can embarrass me.
Pedro Martinez.
He had stuff, he had electric stuff.
Well, you see what
I just remember the 99 All-Star, if I'm not mistaken, the 99 All-Star game.
Yeah, that's what I was like, ooh.
Pedro Martinez was one of baseball's greatest pitchers, but MLB legends say he was mean as a cobra. He could smile in the dugout and still make a grown man nervous in the batter's box. On April 13, 1994, Pedro Martinez took the mound for the Montreal Expos against the Cincinnati Reds. By the 8th inning that day, he had a perfect game going, 24 batters up and 24 batters down. Then he threw a pitch inside to Reggie Sanders, and everything changed in a single moment. Here is the question that follows Pedro through his whole career. How could a pitcher who stood only 5 feet 11 inches and weighed about 170 pounds control an entire league through both skill and fear? As these legends explain what made Pedro so hard to face, use the hype feature and give this video some hype so more baseball fans can hear the full story. Hitters who stepped in against Pedro say they felt something different than they felt against anyone else. It was not only his speed that scared them, it was the whole package working together at once. His fastball and his changeup came out of his hand looking exactly the same. His pitches moved late, after a hitter had already made a decision. His control was so precise that he could put the ball almost anywhere he wanted. He mixed his pitches in ways nobody could predict. And on top of all that, he was not afraid to pitch inside, close to a hitter's body, to take back the part of the plate that belonged to him. Pedro did not see the batter's box as friendly ground. He saw it as something to defend. That mindset, more than any single pitch, is where his story of fear begins. The 1994 moment against Cincinnati was not an accident. It fit a pattern that Pedro would repeat for the rest of his career. He believed the inside part of home plate belonged to the pitcher, and he was ready to defend it every single time he pitched. When Reggie Sanders was hit by that pitch in the 8th inning of a near-perfect game, Sanders was furious. He charged straight at the mound, ready for a fight. Most young pitchers would have backed away or looked for cover behind their teammates. Pedro did not move an inch. He held his ground and faced Sanders head-on, standing tall as players from both teams rushed onto the field around him. That single moment told the entire watching league something important about the young pitcher from the Dominican Republic. Pedro Martinez would not surrender the inside corner of the plate to anyone, no matter how angry they got or how much trouble it caused him personally. Over the course of his career, Pedro hit 141 batters. That is a large number, and it says something real about how he approached pitching. This does not mean every single one of those pitches was thrown on purpose. Pitchers do lose control sometimes, even the very best ones in the world. But it does mean that hitters could never fully relax when they faced him. They knew the inside corner was not a safe place to stand still and get comfortable. A hitter trying to solve Pedro was not only trying to read his pitches and guess what was coming next. He was also thinking, at least a little, about his own safety standing so close to a moving fastball. That kind of thinking can quietly wreck a hitter's game without him even noticing it is happening to him. Think about what it actually takes to hit a baseball well against a major league pitcher. A hitter needs a calm mind, a steady stance, and perfect timing built through years of practice. He needs to trust that his front foot can stay planted and his eyes can stay locked on the ball the whole way in. Now imagine trying to do all of that while also wondering if the next pitch might come in high and tight toward his hands or his ribs. That worry can shrink a hitter's comfort zone without him ever admitting it out loud. It can make him lean back just slightly, which throws off his balance at the exact moment he needs it most. It can make him flinch at pitches that would have been called strikes if he had simply stood still. It can make him give up ground on the outside corner because he is quietly protecting the inside corner in his mind instead. None of this shows up directly in a box score or a highlight reel, but hitters who faced Pedro say they felt it every single time they stepped into the batter's box against him. The fear was not loud or dramatic. It was quiet and constant, sitting in the back of a hitter's mind on every single pitch he threw, inning after inning, season after season. This is where Pedro's story turns toward his body and how strange it was for someone who threw so hard. To understand the fear he created, you first have to understand the mystery of how such a small man threw with such power night after night for so many years without breaking down. Most pitchers who dominate through pure velocity are big men. Randy Johnson, one of the most feared pitchers in the game's history, stood 6 feet 10 inches tall. His height alone gave hitters less time to react, since the ball traveled a shorter path from such a high release point, and it made his pitches look like they were falling out of the sky. Pedro had none of that size working in his favor. He was shorter than most position players, let alone most power pitchers who shared a mound with him. Yet somehow, his fastball came in at 95 to 99 miles per hour, with late life that made it jump right as it reached the plate. The answer lies in his mechanics, not his size. Pedro had unusually long fingers and flexible wrists for a man his height and weight. Combined with a smooth whipping arm action and full extension toward home plate, this let him generate spin and speed that seemed impossible for his frame to produce. His arm moved the exact same way no matter which pitch he threw, whether it was his fastball, his changeup, his curveball, or his cutter. A hitter watching his arm could not tell, in that split second before the ball arrived, whether a fastball or a changeup was on its way. That sameness of motion, paired with his surprising power, is what made him so dangerous to face. His body did not look frightening in the traditional way that a huge frame looks frightening standing on a mound. But once the ball left his hand, it did not matter what he looked like standing there in his uniform. From 1997 through 2003, Pedro put together one of the greatest stretches any pitcher has ever produced in the history of the sport. During those 7 seasons, he won 118 games and lost only 36. That is a winning percentage of 766, which means he won far more often than almost any pitcher who has ever taken the mound. His earned run average during that stretch was 2.20. Earned run average measures how many runs a pitcher allows over 9 innings, so a lower number means a pitcher is doing his job better than the pitchers around him. A number that low, kept up over 7 full years, is extraordinary by any measure baseball has ever used. During this stretch, he won 3 Cy Young Awards, given each year to the single best pitcher in his league, and he finished as the runner-up 2 more times on top of that. He struck out 1,761 batters and posted a whip of 0.940, which means very few runners ever reached base against him at all during those years. His ERA+, a number that compares a pitcher directly to the league average that season, sat at 213 for that stretch, meaning he was more than twice as good as an average pitcher across 7 full seasons of work. These are not just impressive numbers sitting quietly on a page somewhere. Every single one of them represents dozens and dozens of hitters walking back to their dugout feeling like they never truly had a real chance against him. If 1997 through 2003 was Pedro's peak, then 1999 was the season where the whole baseball world saw exactly what he was capable of doing to a lineup. That year, he went 23-4 with a 2.07 ERA and 313 strikeouts. He led the American League in all 3 of those categories, which baseball fans call winning the pitching triple crown, a rare feat that very few pitchers ever accomplish in a single season. His FIP, a stat that looks only at the things a pitcher directly controls, like strikeouts, walks, and home runs, was 1.39 that season, one of the lowest marks recorded anywhere in the modern era of the sport. He struck out 37.5% of every hitter he faced that year. Picture a room full of 100 batters standing in a line. More than 37 of them walked back to the bench without ever putting the ball in play against him at all. To understand why 1999 was so terrifying for hitters across the league, you have to understand the 4 weapons Pedro carried onto the mound with him every single start. His fastball sat between 95 and 99 miles per hour, with a late tailing action that made it seem to jump sideways just before it crossed the plate in front of a hitter. He used this pitch to claim the inside part of the strike zone and to remind hitters without saying a word that the plate was not fully theirs to control. Any hitter who waited too long to decide on this pitch would simply be overpowered by it before he could react. His second weapon, and probably his most feared pitch of all, was his circle changeup. This pitch traveled between 82 and 85 miles per hour, which is 12 to 15 miles per hour slower than his fastball, a massive gap for a hitter's timing to account for. The reason it worked so well is that it left his hand looking exactly like his fastball, with the same arm speed and the same release point every single time. A hitter's eyes and brain simply could not tell the difference in that first fraction of a second after the ball left his fingers. Then, late in its flight, the changeup would drop sharply and fade toward Pedro's arm side, disappearing from where a bat expected to find it. Hitters who guessed fastball would swing early and miss badly, their timing completely destroyed for the rest of the at-bat. This single pitch ended more at-bats than almost any other weapon in baseball at the time it was being thrown. His third pitch was a power curveball. thrown between 76 and 79 miles per hour, with a sharp break that baseball people describe as 12-6, meaning it dropped almost straight down, though, like the hands of a clock, moving from 12 down to 6. This pitch changed a hitter's eye level completely and without warning. After watching a fastball arrive at the letters and a changeup that faded away toward the dirt, a curveball that dropped straight down could freeze even the most aggressive hitter in the league, leaving him standing there helplessly as the ball crossed through the strike zone. His fourth pitch was an inside cutter thrown between 90 and 92 miles per hour, with late movement that darted in toward a hitter's hands right before contact was made. This pitch could jam hitters so badly that it actually broke their bats in half. It would become especially important later in Pedro's story, in a moment that changed another player's entire career and the history of a franchise. What made all four of these pitches so dangerous when used together is something baseball people call tunneling. Imagine every pitch leaving Pedro's hand looking like it is traveling down the exact same path, the same invisible tunnel through the air toward home plate. A hitter has only a fraction of a second to guess what is coming and to start his swing before it is too late to change his mind. If every pitch looks the same at the start of its flight, the hitter is forced to guess blind, and if he guesses wrong, the pitch has already moved somewhere else entirely by the time his bat arrives. Ken Griffey Jr., one of the greatest hitters of his generation, explained that Pedro's fastball set up everything else that followed. Once a hitter learned to respect the fastball, the changeup became nearly impossible to handle, because by the time a hitter realized which pitch it actually was, it was already too late for him to adjust his swing. Cal Ripken Jr. added another layer to this picture that goes beyond pure velocity. He explained that Pedro was not simply a hard thrower who overpowered people with speed alone. He was one of the smartest pitchers of his era, someone who paid attention to small details that other pitchers might easily miss during a game. He noticed a hitter's stance, his balance, and tiny changes in his swing timing from one at-bat to the next, filing all of it away for later use. Then he used those small details against the hitter later in the same game or later in the same season when the hitter least expected it. This meant a hitter could study Pedro carefully all winter, make the correct read on a pitch in the moment, and still end up completely fooled because Pedro had already adjusted his plan based on something the hitter did not even realize he was showing him. If 1999 proved what Pedro could do against a great lineup, then the year 2000 proved just how far ahead of everyone else in the sport he truly was. That season, Pedro went 18-6 with an ERA of 1.74, a number that looks almost unreal for a full season of work. He struck out 284 batters along the way. His ERA plus reached 291 that year, the highest single-season mark in the recorded history of the sport, a record that still stands today. His WHIP was 0.737, an all-time single-season record that has never been matched by another pitcher before or since. To understand how remarkable this truly was, remember that the average ERA across the entire American League that year was 4.90. While other pitchers around the league were allowing nearly 5 runs for every 9 innings they threw, Pedro was allowing less than 2 runs across that same stretch of innings. That ERA plus number means Pedro was 191% better than an average pitcher during that season, according to the numbers themselves. Picture every other pitcher in the league standing on one level, and Pedro standing almost 3 times as high above all of them at once. For the hitters who had to face him that year, this translated into something very real and very uncomfortable, game after game. Base runners almost never showed up on the bases behind them. Scoring chances were rare and hard to create. A single mistake, one bad swing or one missed pitch, could end an entire inning before it had even really started. Opposing lineups sometimes felt beaten before the first pitch was even thrown that night, simply because they already knew what kind of long evening was waiting for them at the plate. Many people who study baseball closely, using detailed statistics gathered from across the sport's history, consider Pedro's 2000 season the greatest single season any pitcher has ever produced, even when compared only to other legendary peaks in the record books, like Greg Maddux from 1992 through 1998, or Randy Johnson from 1995 through 2002. Pedro's numbers from that one incredible year stand alone above the rest. Maddux, across his own peak years, posted a 2.15 ERA and an ERA plus of 190, remarkable numbers in their own right. Johnson, across his peak years, posted a 2.61 ERA with an ERA plus of 177, also remarkable for a pitcher of his size and power. Pedro's single season in 2000 outpaced both of those extended peaks using only 1 year of work, which is part of why so many people who study the numbers closely place that season above every other season in the sport's long history. It is worth remembering that this dominance came during what people now call the steroid era, a period when hitters across the entire league were bigger, stronger, and hitting more home runs than almost any other time in the sport's long history. Ballparks around the league were seeing offensive numbers that had rarely been matched before. Pedro was not simply good during an easy time to pitch, the way some pitchers can look great when the league around them is struggling. He was historically great during one of the single hardest times in history to be a pitcher at all, facing lineups that were doing damage to almost every other arm they saw. That context is part of why the legends who played against him, and even the ones who only watched from a distance, still talk about that 2000 season the way people talk about records that nobody expects to ever see broken again. A season like that does not happen by accident. It happens when a pitcher has already mastered every part of his craft, from his mechanics to his mindset, and then finds a way to raise all of it even higher for one unforgettable summer. For the hitters who had to walk up to the plate against him that year, none of that history mattered in the moment. All that mattered was the next pitch, and the next pitch, and the fact that almost nobody found a real answer for any of them. Statistics alone do not fully explain why hitters feared Pedro Martinez the way they did. To really understand it, you need to hear from the hitters themselves, the men who stood 60 feet and 6 inches away from him and had to make split-second decisions with a bat in their hands, knowing that a wrong guess could end their at-bat before it even really began. Derek Jeter faced Pedro many times during the fierce rivalry between the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, a rivalry that shaped much of baseball during those years. Jeter called Pedro one of the toughest pitchers he ever had to face in his entire career, a career that included facing nearly every great pitcher of his generation. He explained that every single at-bat against Pedro demanded complete focus from the very first pitch, because even a tiny mental slip could turn into an easy strikeout or a weak ground ball back to the mound. Jeter was a career .310 hitter, one of the most consistent and disciplined hitters of his entire generation, admired across the league for his approach at the plate. Against Pedro, that average dropped all the way down to 256. He struck out 22 times in just 99 plate appearances against him, a rate far higher than his career norm. For a hitter as skilled and disciplined as Jeter, these numbers show just how much Pedro could shrink, even a great hitter's margin for error, down to almost nothing. Cal Ripken Jr. faced an even harder time whenever the two of them met on the field. Across 38 plate appearances against Pedro, Ripken managed only 4 hits and batted just 108, a batting average far below anything close to his career standard. He struck out 15 times, a strikeout rate above 39% of his plate appearances, an extremely high number for a hitter of his caliber. Ripken was known throughout his long career as a disciplined, contact-focused hitter who rarely chased bad pitches out of the strike zone and rarely struck out at a high rate compared to other power hitters of his time. Against Pedro, that discipline was simply not enough to keep up. The constant mixing of speeds, combined with the way each pitch tunneled off the exact same arm action, meant Ripken could almost never get comfortable in the batter's box, no matter how well he prepared or how carefully he studied film beforehand. Ken Griffey Jr. offers a different kind of testimony, one built on the impossible choice Pedro forced onto every hitter he ever faced. Griffey explained that facing Pedro meant choosing between 2 bad options and simply hoping you had picked the right one before the pitch arrived. If a hitter set his timing for the fastball, the changeup would leave him lunging out over the plate, completely off balance and unable to recover in time. If he geared up for the changeup instead, the fastball would blow past him on the inner half before he could ever react to it. And if he tried to protect against both of those pitches at the same time, the curveball could drop in and freeze him completely, leaving him no good answer at all. There was no fully safe way to prepare for an at-bat against Pedro Martinez. Whatever a hitter guessed, Pedro seemed to already have another answer waiting for him. Not every hitter fell victim to this pattern, and one important exception deserves real attention in this story. Mike Piazza, one of the greatest hitting catchers the game has ever seen, actually thrived against Pedro across their many meetings. In 26 plate appearances, Piazza batted .385 with 6 home runs and a slugging percentage over 1,100, numbers that are almost unheard of against any pitcher in the league, let alone one as dominant as Pedro was during those years. Piazza struck out only 3 times and did not walk even a single time, meaning he was swinging the bat with total confidence every single time he stepped into the batter's box against him. Even with all of this success, Piazza still respected exactly what made Pedro so difficult for everyone else in the league. He described Pedro as one of the only pitchers in baseball who could dominate a lineup no matter how good or bad that lineup happened to be on any given night. Piazza explained that Pedro's late movement was so sharp that a hitter could take a completely correct swing, the exact swing his coaches would want him to take in that situation, and still fail to make solid contact simply because Pedro had hit his target with such precision. Piazza's success against Pedro does not erase the fear that so many other hitters felt walking up to the plate. Instead, it proves that Pedro was human and beatable under the right circumstances, while still showing just how narrow and difficult the path to actually beating him truly was for almost everyone else who tried. Fear does not come only from movement and velocity on the mound. It also comes from the mind of the man throwing the ball, and Pedro's mind was built for war every single time he pitched, no matter who was standing in the batter's box across from him. He once explained that his entire personality changed about half an hour before a game started, almost like flipping a switch inside himself. He said he became serious and completely focused, something his father had taught him to be about his job from a very young age growing up in the Dominican Republic. He described seeing every opponent as an enemy, comparing the competition on the field to survival in the jungle, where a person had to fight simply to make it through each day alive. That was the level of intensity he brought to the mound every single time he pitched, not just in the biggest moments of a season, but in ordinary games too, against ordinary lineups on quiet weeknights. This mindset shaped everything about how Pedro approached every hitter he ever faced, from the very first pitch to the very last out. Alex Rodriguez, one of the most feared hitters of his own generation, praised Pedro's competitiveness again and again throughout his own career. Rodriguez pointed out that Pedro's confidence and his presence on the mound often gave him a psychological edge before the very first pitch was even thrown, before either man had really done anything at all. Hitters stepping into the box against Pedro were not walking into a neutral situation the way they might against another pitcher. They were walking into a battle that Pedro had already decided in his own mind he was going to win, and hitters could feel that certainty coming off him like heat off a summer sidewalk. Mariano Rivera, one of the greatest relief pitchers in the entire history of the sport, shared the stage with Pedro during some of the most intense years of the Yankees and Red Sox rivalry, a rivalry that gripped the entire sport during that era. Rivera spoke about Pedro with deep and genuine respect, calling him one of the greatest pitchers the game has ever produced in its long history. Rivera explained that facing a Boston team with Pedro on the mound was uniquely difficult for any opponent, because both teams knew ahead of time that scoring chances would be extremely limited that day no matter who was hitting. The fear Pedro created did not stay contained to just one hitter at a time standing in the box. It spread through entire lineups and through entire dugouts, shaping how opposing teams prepared for a series and how they thought about the game long before it even started that afternoon or evening. David Ortiz, who would later become one of Pedro's closest teammates in Boston and one of his closest friends off the field, offered a view from the inside that few others could ever match. Ortiz called Pedro one of the greatest competitors he had ever known in his entire life, on any team, in any sport. He described watching Pedro prepare with incredible care before every single start, carrying a confidence that could unsettle opposing hitters before they had even stepped into the batter's box against him. From Ortiz's own perspective, sitting in the same dugout, Pedro's intimidation was not only something opponents felt from a distance, it was something teammates could see and feel building in the clubhouse hours before the first pitch of the game was ever thrown, a kind of quiet electricity that moved through the whole team. Put all of these voices together and a pattern starts to appear that goes beyond any single pitch or any single game. A hitter facing Pedro was never just facing his fastball or his changeup in isolation. He was facing a pitcher who had already convinced himself, long before the first pitch, that he was going to win the fight standing in front of him. That certainty showed up in small ways that hitters could sense even if they could not always explain it. It showed up in how Pedro carried himself walking out to the mound. It showed up in how little emotion he showed after a big strikeout, as if the result had never really been in doubt to begin with. Rodriguez, Rivera, and Ortiz each described a version of the same thing from three very different angles, one as an opposing hitter, one as a rival pitcher, and one as a teammate watching from the inside. Whether Pedro was standing across from you or standing beside you in the same dugout, the message was the same. He expected to win, and that expectation alone made the inside corner of the plate feel even more dangerous than it already was. There is one story about Pedro and David Ortiz that reveals something different about him, something beyond fear and intimidation entirely. It shows the sharp, observant mind that made him so dangerous on the mound in the first place. After the 2002 season, the Minnesota Twins released Ortiz, letting him go as a free agent, with no team willing to sign him right away that winter. Pedro ran into Ortiz at a restaurant back home in Santo Domingo and could hardly believe what he was hearing from him. A hitter with this much talent, sitting without a team, seemed almost impossible to Pedro when he first heard the news. Pedro remembered something very specific from an at-bat during that 2002 season, a memory that had stuck with him for months afterward. He had thrown Ortiz an inside cutter at 92 miles per hour, a pitch designed specifically to jam big, powerful hitters and stop them from getting the barrel of the bat anywhere near the ball. Most large power hitters simply cannot turn on a pitch that fast, thrown that far inside on their hands. Ortiz did exactly that anyway. He turned on the pitch and drove it deep into the upper deck of the stadium, a swing that few hitters in the league could have made at all. Pedro never forgot that swing after it happened. He understood, better than almost anyone watching that day, exactly how rare that kind of bat speed truly was in the sport. Pedro picked up the phone and called Boston Red Sox executives Larry Lucchino and Theo Epstein directly, not willing to wait and see what other teams might do first. He urged them to sign Ortiz without hesitation, telling them plainly that he wanted Ortiz hitting in that lineup every single time he took the mound himself. Boston listened to what Pedro was telling them. Ortiz signed with the team that winter, and what followed became one of the great success stories in franchise history, a partnership between pitcher and hitter that helped change the direction of the entire organization. Ortiz has said many times since then that his career would never have followed the same path without Pedro's early belief in him, his mentorship along the way, and his willingness to speak up on his behalf when almost nobody else in baseball was willing to do the same. This story matters inside the larger picture of why hitters feared facing Pedro Martinez. The same sharp eye that let him find a weakness in nearly every hitter he ever faced. The same attention to tiny details that Cal Ripken Jr. had described earlier. The kind of attention that noticed a stance shifting by only an inch, or a swing arriving a fraction of a second late, also let him spot rare and genuine greatness in a player that other teams had already given up on completely and were ready to walk away from without a second thought. Pedro was not simply looking for ways to hurt hitters or exploit them. He was constantly studying the game at a level most people never see, noticing things that mattered long before anyone else noticed them. That same mind, turned toward opposing hitters during a game, is exactly what made him so difficult and so uncomfortable to face for 7 straight years at the very top of the sport. Pedro's own peers, the men who pitched alongside him and against him for years, understood his complete package better than anyone watching from the stands ever could. John Smoltz, a Hall of Fame pitcher in his own right with a long and decorated career, described Pedro as a complete pitcher, someone who combined mechanics, raw power, precise location, deception, sharp intelligence, and relentless competitiveness, all in one single package. Smoltz explained that very few pitchers in the entire history of the game brought all of those qualities together at such a high level at the same time, and even fewer sustained that combination for as long as Pedro did across his career. Randy Johnson, standing 6 feet 10 inches tall on the mound, understood better than almost anyone in the sport what it meant to dominate hitters through sheer physical size and leverage alone. Yet Johnson spoke about Pedro with genuine admiration whenever the subject came up, pointing out that Pedro achieved everything he achieved without that same towering frame working in his favor the way it worked for Johnson himself. Johnson viewed Pedro's sustained success against the powerful, steroid-era hitters of his time as one of the greatest accomplishments any starting pitcher had ever produced in the modern game. He explained that Pedro overcame his physical size through superior arm speed, carefully designed pitches built around deception, and a level of competitiveness that matched or exceeded almost anyone else who ever played the sport at that level. Different positions on the field, different eras of their own individual careers, all describing the same basic problem standing 60 feet and 6 inches away from them on any given night, in any ballpark, in any season. Pedro Martinez did not need to look like the biggest man in baseball to become one of the most feared pitchers the sport has ever produced. His aggressive style and his refusal to give up the inside corner made him deeply uncomfortable to face, and that discomfort was real for every hitter who ever stepped into the box against him during those 7 remarkable years. But underneath all of that fear was a level of skill that stood apart from almost everyone who ever played the game at any position. He dominated one of the most powerful offensive eras baseball has ever seen. a time built for hitters and stacked against pitchers, and he did it with a body that looked nothing like the pitchers people expected to see standing at the very top of the sport. Once the ball left his hand, his talent spoke for him, louder than his size ever could on its own. That is why the legends who actually faced him, the men who batted against him, and the men who pitched alongside him through every single one of those seasons, still place him among the greatest pitchers the game has ever seen at any point in its long history. Pedro Martinez proved that greatness does not need to look intimidating while standing still on a mound, waiting for the first batter of the night. It only needs to be real once the game finally begins and the first pitch leaves the hand.